The blood from Florence Garrett's knuckles dripped onto the dusty floorboards of the general store, but she did not let go of the horse trader's collar until she had said every word burning in her chest. "You will feed that mare properly, or I will personally ensure every rancher within 50 miles knows what kind of man you are, Deke Harrison." The year was 1881, and Jordan Valley, Oregon, had never quite known what to make of the strange young woman who lived in the ramshackle cabin at the edge of town, the one who collected broken-down animals the way other women collected china patterns. Florence released the trader with a shove that sent him stumbling backward into a shelf of canned goods. She was 22 years old, tall and lean from years of hard work. With dark blonde hair she kept braided down her back and gray eyes that held more determination than the town thought proper for an unmarried woman. The other customers in the store had gone silent, watching with that mixture of judgment and fascination she had grown accustomed to since arriving in Jordan Valley 3 years ago. "You are insane," Deke spat, wiping dirt from his vest. "That mare is mine, bought and paid for, and if I want to work her into the ground, that is my business." "Then you are a fool as well as a brute," Florence said coldly. "A properly fed horse will work twice as hard and last 3 times as long. But I suppose mathematics is beyond a man who measures his worth in how much suffering he can cause." She turned on her heel and walked out into the afternoon sun, ignoring the whispers that followed her. The wooden sidewalk echoed under her boots as she made her way toward her wagon, her hands still trembling with anger. This was not the first time she had confronted someone over animal mistreatment, and she knew it would not be the last. The townspeople called her crazy, touched in the head, wasting her life on dumb beasts that could not even thank her for her trouble. Let them talk. She had heard worse. "Miss Garrett." The voice was unfamiliar, deep and calm. Florence turned to find a cowboy leaning against the post outside the general store, one boot crossed over the other in a posture of complete ease. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of strong coffee. He wore the usual attire of a working ranch hand, dusty leather chaps over worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a black hat tilted back just enough to show his face. "I do not believe we have met," Florence said warily. Men in Jordan Valley generally fell into 2 categories: those who thought her eccentric but harmless, and those who thought her presence an affront to the natural order. She had learned to be cautious. "Mason Blake," he said, pushing off from the post with an easy grace. "I have been working at the Morrison Ranch since last month. Heard about you, though. The woman who takes in every 3-legged dog and blind cat in the territory." Florence felt her spine stiffen. "If you have come to add your mockery to the chorus, I assure you I have heard it all before." "No, madam." Something in his tone made her pause. Mason Blake stepped closer, and she noticed the way he moved, careful and deliberate, like a man accustomed to working with animals that spooked easily. "I came to say that I think you might be the sanest person in this whole damn town." The words hit her like cold water. Florence stared at him, searching for the joke, the cruel twist that would surely follow. But his expression remained open, honest in a way that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. "I beg your pardon," she said finally. Mason glanced back at the general store, where Deke Harrison was visible through the window, gesticulating angrily to anyone who would listen. A man who would starve a good horse is either stupid or mean, probably both. And a town that looks the other way while it happens. He shook his head. "That is not civilized behavior, no matter how many church socials they hold. You standing up to him was the most reasonable thing I have seen since I rode into Jordan Valley." Florence found herself at a loss for words, a rare occurrence. She had grown so accustomed to defending herself that simple agreement felt like a gift she had not known to want. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That is kind of you to say." "Not kind, true." Mason tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her aware of the dust on her skirts and the hay in her braid. "I heard you have a way with animals that are considered beyond help. I wonder if you might take a look at a dog that showed up at the Morrison place last week. Old cattle dog, smart as they come, but his front leg is badly injured. Boss wants to shoot him, says he is no use anymore." Florence felt the familiar surge of purpose that always came when an animal needed her. "When can you bring him?" Would now be too soon. She should have returned home. She had a goat with an infected hoof that needed tending, and a litter of orphaned rabbits that required feeding every few hours. But the thought of a dog being destroyed simply because he could no longer work made her decision easy. "My wagon is just there," she said, pointing. "Follow me out to my place." Mason's horse was a sturdy buckskin gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor. Florence approved immediately. A man's horse told you much about his character, and this one was well cared for, neither fat from laziness nor gaunt from neglect. Mason rode beside her wagon as they left the main street of Jordan Valley, heading east toward the cluster of cottonwoods that marked her property. "How did you come to this work?" Mason asked after a comfortable silence. "Taking in injured animals, I mean." Florence kept her eyes on the road ahead. "My father was a veterinarian in Pennsylvania. He believed that all creatures deserved mercy and that suffering should be eased whenever possible. I learned from him. He taught you well, from what I hear. He died when I was 19. The words still carried an edge of pain, even after 3 years. "Pneumonia. My mother had already passed, and I had no other family. A man in our town offered to marry me, said it was not proper for a young woman to live alone." She paused, remembering Samuel Cooper's damp hands and the way he had spoken of her as if she were a horse he was considering purchasing. "I declined. He told everyone I was unnatural, unwomanly, made it difficult for me to stay. So you came west." "I came west," Florence confirmed. "Bought land cheap because no one else wanted it, too far from town, and the creek floods every spring. But it suits me. I have space for the animals, and people generally leave me alone." "That seems lonely," Mason said, and there was no judgment in his voice, only observation. Florence shrugged. "Loneliness is preferable to pretending to be something you are not." They arrived at her property as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. The cabin was small but sturdy, built by the previous owner and reinforced by Florence's own determined labor. Around it sprawled a chaotic collection of pens, shelters, and fenced areas, each housing a different assortment of creatures. Florence saw Mason taking it all in. The 3-legged dog sleeping in a patch of sunlight, the blind mare grazing peacefully in the east pasture, the pen of chickens that included several roosters too aggressive for anyone else to keep, now living in harmony under her care. "How many do you have?" Mason asked, wonder evident in his voice. "I stopped counting," Florence admitted. She climbed down from the wagon, her muscles protesting after the long day. "They come and go. Some heal and move on to new homes. Others stay. I make what money I can selling eggs and the vegetables from my garden, and I do occasional work for ranchers when they have a difficult animal. It is enough." Mason dismounted and tied his horse to the fence rail. "I will be right back with the dog. He is in the barn at Morrison's place, just a mile south of here." He rode off before Florence could respond, leaving her standing in her own yard feeling oddly off balance. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with simple respect, without either pity or disdain. She found herself hoping Mason Blake would return, and not just because of the injured dog. While she waited, Florence checked on her current patients. The goat's hoof was responding well to the poultice she had applied that morning. The rabbits were growing stronger each day, their eyes bright and alert. She was mixing feed when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Mason returned with the dog cradled carefully in his arms. The animal was a blue heeler, grizzled with age, with intelligent brown eyes that watched her approach. His right front leg hung at an unnatural angle, clearly broken and poorly set. "Oh, you poor brave soul," Florence murmured, reaching out slowly to let the dog catch her scent. He sniffed her hand tentatively, then gave it a single lick. "Let us see what we can do for you." Mason carried the dog into her cabin without being asked, laying him gently on the table she used for examinations. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, illuminating the shelves of herbs and medicines she had collected, the carefully organized tools of her trade. "This will hurt him," Florence said, examining the leg with gentle fingers. The dog whimpered but did not snap. "The bone has begun to heal incorrectly. I will need to re-break it and set it properly." "What can I do to help?" Florence glanced at Mason, surprised. Most men would have left by now, considering their duty done. Hold him steady, talk to him, keep him calm. What followed was delicate, difficult work. Florence had to focus completely, feeling her way through muscle and bone, finding the place where the fracture had gone wrong. The dog yelped once, sharp and pained, but Mason's steady hands and soothing voice kept him from struggling. By the time Florence had the leg properly aligned and splinted, sweat had plastered her hair to her forehead and her hands ached. "There," she said finally, stepping back. "He will need to stay quiet for several weeks, but if he heals properly, he should be able to walk without pain. He will not work cattle again, but he can have a good life." Mason looked at her with something approaching awe. "That was remarkable. Where did you learn to do that?" "My father, mostly, and practice. I have set more bones than I can count." Florence washed her hands in the basin, suddenly aware of how intimate the last hour had been, the two of them working together in her small cabin. "The dog can stay here while he heals if you can convince Mr. Morrison not to destroy him." "I will pay his keep," Mason said immediately. "And if Morrison will not take him back after he is healed, I will find another place for him, maybe keep him myself. You do not have to do that." "I want to." Mason met her eyes, and Florence felt something shift in her chest, a warmth she had not experienced in years. "Besides, it will give me an excuse to come check on him, make sure he is healing right." Florence felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I suppose that would be acceptable." Mason left as the sun touched the horizon, riding south toward the Morrison ranch with a promise to return in 2 days. Florence stood in her doorway long after he had disappeared, one hand absently stroking the head of the 3-legged dog that had limped over to lean against her leg. "Do not get used to him," she told the dog firmly. "He was just being kind. People like us learn not to expect more than that." But as she went about her evening chores, feeding and watering and checking each animal before the light failed completely, Florence found herself hoping that she was wrong. Mason Blake proved himself a man of his word. 2 days later, he appeared at her gate just after dawn, riding the same buckskin gelding and carrying a basket that proved to contain fresh bread, cheese, and smoked ham. "Thought you might could use some supplies," he said, handing the basket down to her. "I know feeding all these creatures must take most of what you earn." Florence accepted the basket, touched by the thoughtfulness. "That is very generous. Come see your dog. He is doing well." The healer was indeed improving, his eyes brighter and his appetite returning. Mason sat on the floor of the cabin, letting the dog rest his head on his knee while Florence changed the bandages on his leg. "I talked to Morrison," Mason said. "Told him the dog might recover enough to be a house dog, keep watch around the place." He said if you could fix him up, he would keep him on. That is good news. Florence tied off the fresh bandage, pleased with how the swelling had gone down. Another week or two, and we will know if he will bear weight on it. Miss Garrett, Mason said, his tone careful. I wonder if you might tell me about some of your other patients. I have been working with horses my whole life, but I have never met anyone with your gift for understanding them. So Florence told him. About the blind mare who had learned to navigate by sound and smell, now living peacefully in her pasture. About the rooster who had been destined for the stew pot because of his aggression, until Florence realized he had an injured foot that made him defensive, and healing it had gentled his temperament. About the mule that had been beaten so badly he would let no one approach, and how she had spent 3 months sitting in his pen every day, reading aloud from her father's veterinary journals, until finally he had walked over to rest his nose on her shoulder. Mason listened to every word, asking questions that showed he truly understood what she was saying. And then he began to share his own stories, tales of horses he had known and worked with, the ones with personality and intelligence that most people never recognized. The sun was high overhead before Florence realized how much time had passed. She stood abruptly, flustered by her own lack of discipline. I apologize. I have kept you from your work. It is Sunday, Mason said mildly. Even cowboys get a day of rest now and then. But I should let you get to your chores. He paused at the door, turning back with an expression of tentative hope. Would it be all right if I came by again, not just to check on the dog, but to visit, to talk with you? Florence felt her heart beat faster. I would like that. Over the following weeks, Mason became a regular presence at Florence's cabin. He came in the evenings after work, helping with the heavy chores she struggled to manage alone, repairing fence rails and hauling water and mucking out pens. They talked as they worked, about everything and nothing, and Florence found herself opening up in ways she had not since her father's death. She learned that Mason had grown up on a ranch in Wyoming, the youngest of 5 brothers. That he had left home at 16 to make his own way, working ranches from Montana to California. That he had never stayed anywhere long because he was always looking for something, though he could not quite say what. I think I was looking for someone who sees the world the way I do, he said one evening as they sat on her porch steps, watching the stars emerge. Someone who understands that animals are not just tools or property, but living beings deserving of respect. Most people think that makes us soft, Florence said, unfit for the harsh realities of frontier life. Most people are wrong. Mason turned to look at her, his expression serious in the dim light. Florence, I have seen men beat horses bloody for stumbling, shoot dogs for failing to heal fast enough, work cattle until they drop dead in the heat. That is not strength. That is cruelty masquerading as practicality. Real strength is having the power to hurt something and choosing mercy instead. Florence felt tears prick her eyes. I wish more people understood that. I wish I had met you sooner, Mason said softly. All those years I spent thinking I was the only one who felt this way. Their hands were resting on the step between them, nearly touching. Florence felt the warmth of his skin, so close to hers. Almost without thinking, she moved her hand those final inches until their fingers brushed. Mason's hand turned, grasping hers gently. Neither of them spoke. They sat together in the gathering darkness, hands clasped, and Florence felt something she had thought lost to her forever. Hope. The trouble came 3 weeks later, on a hot afternoon when the summer sun beat down mercilessly on the high desert landscape. Florence was in the garden when she heard shouting from the road. She looked up to see Deke Harrison riding toward her cabin, his face red with anger, followed by 2 other men she recognized from town. Florence straightened slowly, trowel still in hand, watching them approach. Every instinct told her this was not a social visit. "You have gone too far this time, Miss Garrett," Deke announced, reining his horse to a stop at her fence. "That is my property you are harboring, and I want it returned immediately." "I have no idea what you are talking about," Florence said coolly, though her heart had begun to race. "Do not play innocent. My hunting dog disappeared 2 days ago, and half the town saw you in the area. I know you took her." Florence's mind raced. She had indeed found a hound bitch 2 days ago, wandering near the creek with a rope burn around her neck and ribs showing through her skin. The dog had been so fearful that Florence had spent an hour coaxing her close enough to lead her home. The hound was currently sleeping in her cabin, finally relaxed enough to rest after days of obvious terror. "If I found a dog, I was saving her from dying of neglect," Florence said. "That animal was half-starved and injured." "She was being disciplined for running off during a hunt," Deke snapped. "And it is none of your concern how I train my own dogs. Now bring her out here before I have the sheriff arrest you for theft. If you have been starving and choking that dog as discipline, then you are not fit to own any animal," Florence said, her voice shaking with anger. "I will not return her to be abused." Deke dismounted, and the men with him followed suit. Florence felt fear spike through her anger. She was alone with the nearest neighbor half a mile away, and these were men who already thought her crazy and unnatural. "You do not get to make that decision," Deke said, advancing toward her gate. "You are just a crazy woman who cares more about dumb beasts than proper Christian behavior. I am taking my dog, and if you try to stop me, I will have you thrown in jail or run out of town, whichever the sheriff prefers." Florence stood her ground, gripping the trowel like a weapon. "If you set foot on my property, I will defend it and every animal under my protection." "With what? A garden tool?" One of the other men laughed. "Be reasonable, Miss Garrett. Step aside." They were at the gate now, beginning to unlatch it. Florence's mind spun frantically, trying to think of what she could do against 3 grown men. Then she heard hoofbeats approaching fast, and Mason's voice rang out across the yard. "I suggest you gentlemen step back from that gate." Mason rode up hard, his buckskin sides heaving. He dismounted in one fluid motion, positioning himself between Florence and the 3 men. His hand rested on the gun at his hip, not threatening, but not hiding the weapon either. "This is none of your business, Blake," Deke said, though he had stopped advancing. "This is between me and the crazy woman." "Miss Garrett is not crazy, and anything concerning her is my business," Mason said quietly. "Now, I heard your complaint. You think she has your dog. But I have been helping Miss Garrett with her animals for weeks now, and I can tell you that every creature here is either wild caught and recovering, or was abandoned or abused. She has taken nothing that was being properly cared for. You calling me a liar? I am calling you a man with a reputation for mistreating animals. Half the ranch hands in this valley know better than to work for you because of how you treat your horses. So yes, if you say you have been caring for a dog properly, and that dog ends up here half dead from starvation, I am saying one of those things is a lie." The tension stretched tight as a bowstring. Florence saw Deke's hand move toward his own gun, and her breath stopped in her throat. But Mason did not flinch, did not move, just stood there with a calm certainty that was somehow more intimidating than any aggressive posture could have been. "This is not over," Deke said finally. "I will talk to the sheriff, see what he thinks about her stealing property." "You do that," Mason said. "And while you are there, I will be happy to testify about the condition that dog was in when Miss Garrett found her. I am sure Judge Morrison would be interested to hear about it too. He is my boss, in case you forgot, and he takes a dim view of animal cruelty." The threat was clear. Judge Morrison was the most powerful man in Jordan Valley, and his opinion could make or break a man's reputation in this territory. Deke's face went purple with rage, but he remounted his horse, jerking cruelly on the reins in a display that proved everything Mason had said about him. "You are both crazy," he spat. "Deserve each other." The three men rode off, and Florence felt her knees go weak. She sat down hard on the porch steps, the trowel falling from her nerveless fingers. Mason was beside her in an instant, his hand on her shoulder. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "No, I am fine." Florence looked up at him, seeing the worry in his eyes. "How did you know to come?" "I was in town when Deke was gathering those men, heard him talking about teaching you a lesson. Rode as fast as I could." Mason's hand moved from her shoulder to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Florence, I was so scared I would not get here in time." The touch was intimate, tender in a way that made Florence's breath catch. She reached up to cover his hand with her own, holding it against her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not come." "You do not have to thank me for caring about what happens to you." Mason's voice was rough with emotion. "Florence, these past weeks, getting to know you, seeing your kindness and your strength, I have fallen in love with you. I know this is not the time or place for such declarations, but I need you to know that I will always come when you need me. Always." Florence felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I love you too. I think I have from that first day when you said I was the sanest person you knew. No one has ever understood me the way you do." Mason leaned forward, and their lips met in a kiss that was both gentle and desperate, a sealing of the bond that had been growing between them since that first meeting outside the general store. When they finally pulled apart, both were trembling. "Marry me," Mason said. "I know it is fast, and I do not have much to offer yet, but I promise I will spend every day working to build a good life for us. We can combine our properties, create a real sanctuary for animals that need help. I will work the ranches during the day and come home to you every night. Please, Florence, say you will marry me." "Yes," Florence said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, of course, yes." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Jordan Valley Church, with Judge Morrison standing as witness, and most of the town watching with expressions ranging from bewilderment to disapproval. Florence wore her best dress, pale blue calico with white lace at the collar, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers Mason had picked that morning. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Mason kissed her with such obvious devotion that even the most skeptical onlookers had to smile. The reception was held at their combined property, which Mason had already begun transforming. He had spent every spare moment building new pens and shelters, repairing the cabin, expanding the small barn. Florence watched him move through the crowd of guests, mostly Morrison Ranch hands and a few townspeople who had always been kind to her, and felt her heart swell with love. "You did well for yourself," Judge Morrison said, appearing at her elbow with a glass of lemonade. The older man smiled at her with genuine warmth. "Mason is one of the best men I have ever had the privilege to employ. And you, Miss Garrett, or should I say Mrs. Blake, are exactly the kind of determined, compassionate person this territory needs. I hope you will both stay in Jordan Valley for many years to come." "Thank you, sir," Florence said. "That means more than you know." As the sun set, the guests departed, leaving Florence and Mason alone in their home. The summer evening was warm, the air filled with the songs of crickets and the soft sounds of animals settling for the night. Mason took Florence's hand and led her to the porch, where they sat together on the steps, just as they had so many times before. "Are you happy?" Mason asked, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. Florence leaned into him, feeling safe and loved in a way she had never expected to experience. Happier than I ever imagined possible. I spent so long thinking I would always be alone, that no one would ever accept me as I am. You will never be alone again, Mason promised. We are partners now in everything. Your dreams are my dreams. Your work is my work. Over the next year, they proved those words true. Together, they transformed Florence's small operation into something larger and more organized. Mason built proper facilities for recovery and rehabilitation, while Florence's expertise with healing and animal behavior became known throughout the region. Ranchers began bringing difficult horses for her to work with, paying fair prices for her time and knowledge. They took in more injured and abandoned animals, healing what they could and finding good homes for those that recovered fully. The town's opinion of Florence shifted gradually. It was hard to maintain that someone was crazy when their husband was so clearly devoted to them, and when their work produced tangible results. The angry mutterings faded into grudging respect, and eventually into something approaching admiration. Deke Harrison left Jordan Valley 6 months after the wedding, after Judge Morrison made it clear that animal abusers were not welcome in his territory. Florence heard the news with quiet satisfaction, knowing that his departure would mean better treatment for animals throughout the region. In the spring of 1883, Florence discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had never thought much about children, so focused on her work that motherhood had seemed like something for other women, women who fit more easily into the world's expectations. Mason found her crying in the garden one morning and immediately dropped to his knees beside her, his face creased with concern. "What is wrong? Is it the baby? Should I ride for the doctor?" "No, nothing like that." Florence wiped at her tears, feeling foolish. "I am just frightened. What if I am terrible at this? What if I cannot love a child the way I should? All I have ever known is animals." Mason pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Florence Blake, you are the most loving, patient, caring person I have ever known. You have healed creatures that everyone else had given up on. You see value where others see worthlessness. If you can extend that compassion to broken animals, imagine what kind of mother you will be to our child. But what if the baby thinks I am strange? What if other children tease them because their mother is the crazy animal woman? Then we will teach our child that being different is not the same as being wrong," Mason said firmly. "We will raise them to stand up for what is right, even when it is unpopular. To show mercy to those who cannot defend themselves, just like their mother does every single day." Florence rested her head on his shoulder, feeling her fears begin to ease. "You always know what to say. I just tell you the truth as I see it. You are remarkable, Florence. And you are going to be a wonderful mother." Their son was born in November of 1883, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. They named him Daniel Mason Blake, and from his first breath, he was surrounded by love. Florence's fears proved unfounded. Motherhood came to her as naturally as healing had, perhaps because she approached it with the same patience and attentiveness she gave to her animal patients. She learned to read Daniel's needs, to soothe his cries, to find joy in his small victories. And Mason was as devoted a father as he had been a husband, rising in the night to walk with a fussy baby, building toys from scraps of wood, teaching his son gentleness through example. As Daniel grew, he toddled after his parents through the animal sanctuary, learning early to be calm around the creatures in their care. His first word was not mama or papa but dog, spoken with delight as he pointed at the old healer who had brought his parents together, now living out his days as a beloved pet. The seasons turned, bringing changes and challenges. A harsh winter in 1884 tested their resources, but they managed to keep all their animals fed and warm. A drought the following summer strained the water supply, but Mason's ingenuity in creating a better irrigation system from the creek saw them through. Through it all, Florence and Mason worked side by side, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. In 1886, Judge Morrison offered Mason a position as his ranch foreman, a job that came with better pay and more respect. Mason accepted, on the condition that he could continue to maintain irregular hours when animal emergencies arose. The judge, who had become a friend as well as an employer, agreed readily. That same year, a veterinarian from Boise heard about Florence's work and traveled to Jordan Valley to meet her. Dr. William Peterson was an elderly man, considering retirement, and he was impressed by Florence's knowledge and skill. He spent 3 weeks at their sanctuary, teaching her some of his more advanced techniques and learning from her intuitive understanding of animal behavior. "You have a gift, Mrs. Blake," he told her before he left. "Your father would be proud of what you have built here." The words meant more to Florence than any amount of money could have. She thought of her father often, wishing he could see her life, meet her husband, know his grandson. She liked to think he would have approved. Daniel grew into a curious, gentle child who shared his parents' love for animals. By the time he was 4, he was helping with simple chores, scattering feed for the chickens and bringing water to the dogs. He showed no sign of being ashamed of his unconventional upbringing. Instead, he spoke proudly to anyone who would listen about his mother's ability to heal and his father's skill with horses. In the summer of 1888, Florence discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was no fear, only joy. She and Mason had spoken of wanting more children, of filling their home with love and laughter. Their daughter was born in February of 1889, during a snowstorm that blanketed Jordan Valley in white. She had her mother's blonde hair and her father's dark eyes, and they named her Catherine Florence Blake. Daniel, now 5, was immediately smitten with his baby sister, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to lullabies. As the 1880s gave way to the 1890s, Florence and Mason's sanctuary became an established institution in the region. People came from miles around seeking help with difficult animals, and Florence's reputation as a healer grew. She trained several young people in her methods, passing on her father's teachings to a new generation. Mason rose to become one of the most respected cattlemen in eastern Oregon, known for his fair treatment of both animals and workers. He never forgot where he had started or why he had chosen this life. Every evening, no matter how hard the day had been, he came home to Florence and their children, to the sanctuary they had built together. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1892, Mason surprised Florence with a gift. A hand-carved sign that read, "Blake Animal Sanctuary, founded 1881, with a quote underneath. "The greatness of a nation can be judged by the way its animals are treated." They hung the sign at the entrance to their property, and Florence wept happy tears as Mason held her close. "I never imagined this life," she said. "When I came to Jordan Valley, I thought I would always be alone, always be the crazy woman on the edge of town. But you saw me differently. You called me sane when everyone else called me mad." "Because you are sane," Mason said, kissing her forehead. "You are wise and compassionate and good, and I am the luckiest man alive to spend my days loving you." Their children grew healthy and strong, learning from their parents that true strength lay in mercy, that kindness was never weakness, and that speaking up for those who had no voice was the highest calling. Daniel showed his father's natural horsemanship, while Catherine inherited her mother's healing touch. The townspeople who had once whispered about the crazy animal woman now pointed to the Blakes with pride, telling visitors about the couple who had built something remarkable from nothing but determination and love. Florence became a beloved figure, known for her generosity and her willingness to help anyone who came to her in need. In 1895, when Florence was 36 and Mason 40, they stood together on their porch one evening, watching their children play in the yard. Daniel, now 12, was teaching 8-year-old Catherine how to gentle a new foal that had arrived that morning. The sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, and the mountains stood purple against the horizon. "You ever regret it?" Mason asked softly. "Choosing this life?" "It has not been easy." Florence took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Not for a single moment. Every hardship we faced only proved that this was exactly where we were meant to be, doing exactly what we were meant to do, together." "Together," Mason agreed, pulling her close. "Always together." As the years continued to pass, their love only deepened. They grew old side by side, working the land they loved, caring for animals others had given up on, raising their children to be kind and strong and true. Their sanctuary became a legacy, a testament to what could be built when two people found each other and chose to face the world as partners. When people in Jordan Valley told stories about the old days, they always included the tale of the woman they had called crazy for caring about dumb beasts, and the cowboy who had called her the sanest one he knew. They spoke of how that meeting had changed not just two lives, but an entire community, teaching them that compassion was not weakness but the truest form of strength. Florence and Mason Blake lived long, happy lives, surrounded by children and eventually grandchildren, by animals they had saved and people they had helped. They never regretted a single choice that had led them to each other, never wished for an easier path. Because the hard path had given them something precious, a love built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the unwavering belief that they had found in each other the partner they had always needed. On quiet evenings when the work was done and the animals settled for the night, they still sat together on their porch steps, hands clasped, watching the stars emerge. And in those moments, Florence would remember that day in 1881, when a cowboy had stepped out of the shadows to tell her she was not crazy, but sane. That single moment of recognition had changed everything, had given her not just love but validation, proof that she had never been wrong to care so deeply. "I love you," she would whisper into the darkness. "I love you too," Mason would answer. From that first day to this last breath, always. And under the vast Oregon sky, in the sanctuary they had built with their own hands and filled with their own love, Florence and Mason Blake knew they had found what so many searched for and so few discovered. A love that honored who they truly were, flaws and passions and convictions intact. They had found each other, and in doing so, had found home. Their story became legend in Jordan Valley, passed down through generations as an example of what was possible when two kindred souls recognized each other across a crowded world. The Blake Animal Sanctuary continued long after its founders had passed, maintained by their children and grandchildren, a living monument to the idea that caring for the helpless was never crazy, but the most human thing a person could do. And in the end, that was Florence's greatest legacy. Not just the animals she had saved or the people she had taught, but the proof that mercy and strength could exist in the same heart, that love could flourish in the harshest environments, and that sometimes the sanest thing in a mad world was choosing compassion over cruelty, every single time.